Hello everyone, welcome to Next IAS. In this section, we will discuss the environment questions asked in Anubhav 4. Let's start. The first question says that Economic Survey has discussed the role of vertical gardening in mitigating urban heat islands. In this context, consider the following potential benefits of vertical gardening. We know that rapid urbanization has led to various environmental issues including urban heat islands, increase in air pollution, increase in concentration of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, etc. And we also know that urban areas have limited horizontal spaces, so vegetation cannot be expanded or planted on those limited horizontal spaces. In this context, vertical gardening is a promising makeshift solution to some of these urban problems. Let's see how a vertical garden looks. See, this is an image of vertical garden. It simply refers to planting of certain plants on the vertical planes of cities such as buildings, beneath the flyovers or bridges, etc. So, let us see the benefits of vertical gardening. First is improved thermal performance of buildings. Thermal performance, it refers to the ability of a building or a structure to regulate temperature and manage heat. When plants are present on a surface, it leads to cooling of the surface. So, it reduces the heat, it reduces the cooling requirement for that particular structure and results in energy efficiency, thereby improving the thermal performance of that structure. So, this is correct. Second, carbon sequestration and reduction in greenhouse gases. This is also correct. The plants of vertical gardens, they capture carbon dioxide and through the process of photosynthesis convert it into biomass. This results in sequestration of carbon and reduction in greenhouse gases. Third is enhancement of urban biodiversity. This is also correct. As we see that the plant biodiversity is increased in the vertical gardens and it also leads to increase in species of birds, pollinators, bees, insects, etc. by providing a shelter and a suitable habitats to these species, thereby increasing in biodiversity. The fourth is drastic reduction in groundwater depletion. Though vertical gardens require water in terms of irrigation, but groundwater depletion and drastic reduction in that, it is not a benefit of a vertical garden, nor is it a consequence of vertical gardening. So, this becomes incorrect. The fifth is improvement in air quality by filtering pollutants. This is also true because the plants, they capture and filter the dust particles and particulate matter from the soil, which results in filtering the pollutants and improvement of the air quality. And last, increase in energy efficiency. As we already saw that vertical gardening improves the thermal performance of buildings, thereby reducing the need for artificial cooling requirements. This in turn increases the energy efficiency of a structure. So, the answer will be 5 of these 6 statements is correct and that is C. Coming to next question. With reference to carbon capture and storage and carbon dioxide removal methods, consider the following statements. The first statement says that CCS captures carbon dioxide at the point of emission. This is correct. Carbon capture and storage is a method that captures the carbon dioxide before it is released into the atmosphere. It captures carbon at the point of emission, which includes power plants, industries, etc. Whereas CDR removes the carbon dioxide that is already present in the atmosphere. This is also correct. Carbon dioxide removal is refers to various methods and techniques that remove the carbon dioxide that is already present in the atmosphere. There are various methods of CDR, which includes afforestation, carbon fertilization, ocean mineralization, direct air capture, etc. So, the first statement is correct. Second statement says that CCS is a climate adaptation strategy while CDR is a mitigation strategy. Now, these two terms, climate adaptation and climate mitigation, these are widely discussed in environmental conferences and meetings. Let us see what they mean. Climate mitigation, it means reduction in the amount of or removal of carbon and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, so that we remove or reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to limit further increase in temperatures. Whereas adaptation, it refers to adjusting to the climate impact that has already occurred or is expected to occur. So these two terms are very different. Now, as we have seen that CCS is also removing or reducing the carbon and CDR is also removing and reducing the carbon. So both of these are mitigation strategies. None is adaptation strategy. So the answer will be A, that is only statement 1 is correct. Coming to next question. Which of the following recently launched a nature restoration law to protect and restore all the ecosystems that are in need of restoration by 2050? This law has been launched by the European Union. This law sets binding targets for various ecosystems including forests, lake, urban areas, marine habitats, etc. And it aims to restore the degraded land and marine areas, 20% of the degraded land and marine areas by 2030, and all the ecosystems that are in need of restoration by 2050. This law is a part of broader European Green Deal that focuses upon regenerating the ecosystem and doing away with the harmful impacts that have already occurred in various ecosystems. Coming to next question. Consider the following statements with respect to black buck. The black bucks are grazing animals that are mainly found in open grasslands. This is correct. The black buck is an animal that mainly feeds on grasses and small shrubs and can be found in arid and semi-arid areas of India. Second statement says that black bucks are endemic to India and are presently restricted to Rajasthan. This is incorrect. They are endemic to Indian subcontinent and can be found in India as well as some areas of Nepal. And among Indian states, they are found in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, etc. So they are not restricted to India but can be seen in 3 broader ranges of India, namely Western India, Central India and Southern India. Third statement says that it is listed under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. This statement is correct. The black bucks have been accorded with the highest degree and highest level of protection according to the Schedule 1 of WPA. Next says that black buck is a species of deer. This is incorrect. Black buck is not a deer but an antelope. Let us see what exact is the difference between a black buck and an antelope. See, this is a black buck and this is a deer. So black buck is not a deer but an antelope. The main difference between these two species is this keratinous growth that is growing on their heads. Among deer, this keratinous growth is known as antlers. Among deer, this growth is also branched. See, you can see that these are the branches emanating from this keratinous growth. And among antelopes, these growths, they are known as horns. and they are single unbranched horns. See, you can not see any branches over here, they are singles, so they are unbranched. One more difference between an antelope and a deer is that these antlers, these are subject to periodic shedding. That is, the deer usually in a span of 1 or 2 years, the deer shed their antlers, and after that these antlers regrow. Whereas in case of antelopes, these horns are permanent structures. These are not subject to shedding. So the black buck is a species of an antelope and not a deer. Other antelopes include the Tibetan antelope, that is commonly referred to as chiru, Tibetan gazelle, etc. And deer, the species of deer include the sambar deer, etc. So the answer of this question will be statement 1 and 3 are correct. This black buck is vehemently protected by the Bishnoi community of Rajasthan. Coming to next question, it says that Hoolock gibbon is the only species of apes found in India. Recently, the Global Gibbon Network conference has been held in China, which has come up with certain observations. The conference observed that there are 20 species of apes that are found across the world, and all those 20 species of apes are at high risk of extinction. This Hoolock gibbon is the only species of apes that is found in India. Other 19 are not found. This is how a Hoolock gibbon looks. It is a mammal and is presently restricted to certain areas of Assam and a few places in Arunachal Pradesh. This is a very shy mammal and it rarely comes to the surface. In fact, it quenches its thirst from the water that is present on these leaves, and it is among the fastest ape. In Assam, a special dedicated sanctuary by the name of Hulungpar Gibbon Sanctuary is made specially for the protection of this Hoolock gibbon. Second, Indian wild ass is found only in the state of Gujarat. According to the recent wild ass population estimate, the population of wild asses has been continuously increasing in India. So, the wild ass, it looks like this. It has a brown body and a white belly, and it is found exclusively in the protected area of Little Run of Kutch in the state of Gujarat. Some of these wild asses can also be found in Greater Run of Kutch in the state of Gujarat. So, it is restricted to the state of Gujarat. This statement is also correct. The third statement says that okapi is not naturally found in India. Now, this okapi, it has been in news because of this reason. See, our Honorable Prime Minister has been seen with an okapi. This is how an okapi looks. It is a mammal in the family of giraffe. It has been discovered only in 1900s. So, but it differs from a giraffe in the way that it has a shorter neck and shorter legs as compared to giraffe. Also, its stripe resembles that of zebra, but it is a member of the family of Giraffidae. So, this okapi, it is not naturally found in India. This is correct. This is a mammal which is exclusively found in the rainforests of Ituri division in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa. So, all the three statements are correct. Okay. Next question says that consider the following information regarding two bird species. Locally known, species 1, locally known as Garud and Hargila. This endangered bird, it is now endangered currently. This endangered bird is found in the Brahmaputra Valley of Assam. Wildlife biologist Purnima Devi Burman received the UNEP Champions of Earth Award for its conservation. The description of species 1 pertains to greater adjutant stork. Let us see how this looks. See, this is a greater adjutant stork. It is a big bird with a long neck and long bill. This greater adjutant stork is found in the areas of Assam, and what the problem or the issue with this bird was that it was considered to be a harbinger of bad omen by the villagers, and because of this the villagers used to cut the branches of the trees or the entire tree where this greater adjutant stork used to lay its eggs. So the wildlife biologist Purnima Devi Burman was alarmed seeing this, and since 2007 she has been influencing the villagers and convincing them that this bird is not a harbinger of bad luck, and she has been conserving this bird with an army of about 20,000 women volunteers known as the Hargila Army. For her efforts towards the conservation of greater adjutant stork, Purnima Devi Burman has received the UNEP Champions of Earth Award. This is the highest environmental award that is given by the United Nations. Additionally, she has also received the Whitley Award, which is referred to as the Green Oscar. So, this Garud and Hargila refers to greater adjutant stork. Species 2, a critically endangered bird found only in Sri Lankamaleshwara Wildlife Sanctuary of Andhra. Once thought extinct, it was rediscovered in 1986, but it has not been sighted after that. This description refers to Jerdon's courser. See, this is Jerdon's courser. It is a very small bird with a big eye and short bill. This Jerdon's courser was recorded for the first time by a British botanist in 1848, and it is a highly elusive bird. That is, it is rarely sighted. Because of this reason, very little is known about its behavior or its breeding patterns. This bird was again sighted in 1986 in a small region of Eastern Ghats in Andhra Pradesh, and this Sri Lankamaleshwara Wildlife Sanctuary has been dedicatedly made for the protection and conservation of the Jerdon's courser. However, it has not been sighted in the recent times, which has given rise to various speculations about its extinction. The main cause of the rareness of this bird includes the destruction of its habitat, mainly the scrub vegetation where it inhabits. So the answer of this question will be D. Coming to next question. Now, recently, Global Nitrous Oxide Assessment Report has been released by the United Nations. Global Nitrous Oxide. This report has been recently released by UNEP, and it has come up with various observations regarding nitrous oxide. In this context, which of the following statements with respect to nitrous oxide are correct? So first we need to know that nitrous oxide is a potent greenhouse gas. It is a greenhouse gas. Now, what are these? Greenhouse gases are those gases which have the capability to trap the heat energy that is emanating from the earth. We all must be aware of mechanism of heating of the earth. Let us have a quick recap. We know that the earth is not heated up by the incoming solar radiation, but by the terrestrial radiations. See, this is the surface of earth, and the incoming solar radiation is coming on the surface of the earth. But the earth is not getting heated up by this. After receiving this insolation, the earth in itself becomes a radiating body and starts to emit radiation in the form of long wave radiation. This is referred to as terrestrial radiation. Our atmosphere is heated up by this terrestrial radiation through the mechanism of GHGs. These GHGs function as pockets of the atmosphere and they have the ability to trap up the heat energy. So, greater the amount of GHGs in the atmosphere, greater will be the heat and the temperature on earth. So, this nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas. Now, coming to statement 1, nitrous oxide has a higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. This is correct. Let us see what is global warming potential. It is the measure of how much a greenhouse gas will warm the atmosphere in a particular lifespan as compared to that of CO2. For example, the global warming potential of carbon dioxide is taken as a reference and hence it is taken as to be 1. Then the global warming potential is a measure of how much heat energy will be trapped by a particular gas in a specific time period as compared to that of carbon dioxide. So, our statement says that global warming potential of nitrous oxide is higher. This is correct. The global warming potential of carbon is, if it is taken to be 1, then over the same period of 100 years, the global warming potential of nitrous oxide is almost 280 to 310 times that of CO2. So, it is way larger than carbon dioxide. Second statement says that nitrous oxide is an ozone depleting substance but is not covered under Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. This statement is also correct. Nitrous oxide is a potent ODS. Let's briefly look how ozone depletion occurs. See, there are certain substances referred to as ODS. These include chlorine, bromine, etc. These substances are released from aerosol sprays, refrigerants, etc. Now, these substances get traveled to the stratosphere where the ozone is present with air currents. In stratosphere, what happens is there is UV radiation from the sun. This UV radiation leads to breaking of these molecules and resulting in elemental chlorine. This chlorine reacts with the ozone present in stratosphere and eventually results in formation of ClO and oxygen gas. This initiates a chain of reactions which eventually damage the ozone layer. A single chlorine atom has the ability to damage almost 1,000 molecules of ozone. In this way, the earth is deprived of its natural sunscreen in the form of ozone layer through these ozone depleting substances. So, our question says that N2O is an ODS but is not covered under Montreal Protocol. This is correct. The Montreal Protocol is one of the highest ratified environmental treaty, is a treaty with one of the highest ratifications, and it currently covers substances such as CFCs, halogens, carbon tetrachloride, etc. but it does not cover nitrous oxide. So, this is also correct. Statement C says that agriculture is the biggest anthropogenic contributor of N2O emissions. This is also correct. See, what happens is farmers use nitrogenous based fertilizers, especially urea, to increase their production. But when fertilizers are put in excess amount as is required by the plant or soil, that results in presence of excess nitrogen in the soil. This excess nitrogen undergoes the process of nitrification as well as denitrification, and it eventually results in formation of nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So agriculture is the biggest anthropogenic contributor of N2O emissions. Hence, all the three statements are correct. Coming to next question. Additionally, this nitrous oxide, it has been classified as a super pollutant by the UNEP. Now, super pollutant are those which have a higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide, but they have a comparatively lower lifespan than carbon dioxide. So what essentially means is that they have a great ability to warm the atmosphere, but they do not remain in the atmosphere for a long period of time, and hence controlling these super pollutants and reducing or removing them is a very good method to control overall global warming. So it has been classified as a super pollutant by the UNEP. Coming to next question, it says that consider the following statements with reference to India's 4th biennial report to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Statement 1 says that India has reduced the emission intensity of its GDP by around 35% during the period of 2005 to 2020. This is correct. The emission intensity refers to the amount of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide released for every unit increase in GDP of a country. That is, if the GDP of a country is increased by 1 unit, what is the corresponding increase in the emission of greenhouse gases is calculated by this emission intensity of GDP. It essentially measures the environmental cost of economic growth. So India has reduced the emission intensity of its GDP by around 35% during this period, and this is correct, and this has led to decoupling of economic growth from environmental emissions. Our target, the NDC target of India, is to reduce this emission intensity of GDP by about 45% by 2030. The second statement says that methane accounted for second highest contribution to total GHG emissions after carbon dioxide. This is also correct. The CO2 accounted for about 80% of total GHG emissions, and methane accounted for about 13%, making it the second highest contributor. Third says that industrial processes and product use sector is contributed the most to overall GHG emissions. This is incorrect. The highest contribution to the total GHG emission was by energy sector. That was around 75%. The next was by agriculture, around 13%, and industrial processes and product use contributed around 8% to the overall GHG emission. Hence, it will be incorrect. The fourth statement says that for the first time in 2024, the share of non-fossil resources in the installed electricity capacity generation crossed 50%. This is also correct. See, over here it is not simply about the number. The number or the percentage is significant because it is a part of the nationally determined contribution, that is NDCs, that India has submitted to the UNFCCC. So we have to achieve this number, but we have not yet achieved, although it's the time period is 2030. See, these are India's NDCs. to reduce emission intensity of its GDP by 45%. Currently, we have reduced it by around 36%. Second is to achieve about 50% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel based energy resources by 2030. This has not yet reached 50%. And the third is to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through afforestation and replanting. These are India's NDCs. Now, let us know the difference between non-fossil fuel based energy and renewable energy. There is a slight difference between these two. Renewable energy resources are those which have the ability to replenish themselves naturally. It includes solar, wind, geothermal, etc. Whereas non-fossil fuel based resources are those which are not derived from fossil fuels such as CNG and petroleum, but they are not necessarily renewable resources. For example, nuclear energy. It is a non-fossil nuclear energy is a non-fossil fuel based energy but not a renewable energy. Also, in this context, the distinction between India's NDCs and India's Panchamrit targets becomes significant. Some of these may overlap, but there are differences between them. For example, the target of net zero by 2070 is part of India's Panchamrit but not of NDCs. Reduction of carbon intensity forms a part of both. Likewise, there are some points which are overlapping but others are different. So, the answer of this question will be B, that is only statement 1 and 2 are correct. Coming to next question. This recently discovered species has a unique adaptation to fire and a limited habitat range in Western Ghats. It is a fire resilient dual blooming species of plant. In addition to normal blooming, a second spell of blooming occurs in which a rigorous burst of flowering is triggered by the grassland fires commonly set by locals in the region. This description is that of Dicliptera polymorpha. See, this is the species of Dicliptera polymorpha. This is a very unique species in the way that it undergoes flowering and blooming in the first phase, that is of normal blooming. The second phase of blooming occurs only and only if there is fire in its habitat. The fire induces blooming and flowering in this plant. In absence of fire, what happens is only one phase of blooming occurs and the second does not occur. This is a very rare phenomenon and characteristic which is observed in this plant. This plant is restricted to some of the regions of Western Ghats and it is mainly found in the grasslands of Western Ghats. So, answer will be C. This Curcuma kachinghesi is a species of turmeric that has been recently discovered. It is also a flowering plant. Ficus religiosa, we all know that it is peepal tree and Mangifera indica is mango. So, the correct answer is Dicliptera polymorpha. This is a very significant discovery. Okay, question 77. India's first protected sanctuary dedicated to the country's national aquatic animal is located in which of the following states? So, all of us know that India's national aquatic animal is Gangetic dolphin, and the first protected sanctuary of Gangetic dolphin has been made in Bhagalpur, Bihar, across a 60-kilometer stretch of river Ganges, in which almost half of India's total dolphins can be found. This Gangetic dolphin as we all know, is practically blind. It has evolved into being blind because of the reason of being living in turbid waters of river Ganges. It relies on echolocation for locating its prey. So this sanctuary is located in the Bhagalpur district of Bihar across a 60-kilometer stretch of river Ganges. Coming to next question. It says that with reference to carbon border adjustment mechanism, consider the following statements. CBAM is a measure introduced by the European Union to impose a tax on carbon emissions embedded in the production of goods. See, this statement is correct. CBAM has been introduced by the European Union to impose a tax on embedded emissions of carbon. In this context, two terms becomes relevant. One is embedded emission and the other is carbon leakage. See, embedded emission refers to the total amount of carbon and other greenhouse gases that are emitted during the entire production cycle of any good. So, as we all know that EU has very stringent climatic and emission norms. In this context, it has introduced a new CBAM which aims to tax goods that are coming from non-EU countries so that they are subject to the same pricing mechanism that are imposed on the producers which are located within the European Union. So this statement is correct. Second statement says that CBAM applies only to imports into the EU from non-EU countries. This is also correct. It is very natural that, see, within EU, the companies are required to pay a tax or tariff. The companies are required to pay certain amount for emission of carbon. Whereas in non-EU countries, the companies may not be subject to such equivalent amount for emission of carbons. In such case, what happens is the companies shift their production from the countries which have stringent laws to the countries which have less stringent laws to reduce their cost of production. So, the EU has applied this tariff only on non-EU countries so that the goods from non-EU countries do not gain an unfair advantage over the goods from the countries located within the EU. So, this statement is also correct. And this phenomenon of transferring of a company from a country having stringent environmental regulations and stringent emission taxes to a country which has less emission tax or amount is referred to as carbon leakage. These two terms, embedded emissions and carbon leakage, are increasingly used with reference to carbon taxation. The next is CBAM currently covers only iron and steel and electricity sectors. This is incorrect because currently CBAM covers about 6 sectors which includes aluminium, cement, fertilizers, etc. So it is not restricted to iron and steel and electricity. The fourth statement says that CBAM provides certain exemptions to least developed countries in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. This is also incorrect. The European Union has expressly stated that the CBAM applies uniformly to every nation that is not a part of EU, and it provides no exemption to any developing nation or to any least developed country, thereby negating the principle of CBDR. So only statement 1 and 2 are correct in context of this question. See, this is the mechanism how a CBAM works. When a non-EU supplier exports the goods to EU, it has to pay a tax or tariff that will make the cost of production equivalent to that of the production cost that is presently in the EU by application of this CBAM. Question 79 says that consider the following statements with respect to sea anemones. Recently, mass bleaching of sea anemone has been observed across various locations of Lakshadweep Islands. So, statement 1 says that sea anemones are invertebrate marine animals that resemble flowers. This is correct. This is how a sea anemone looks. See, it has a radial symmetry and it has colorful tentacles and it kind of resemble flowers. In fact, this sea anemone has the same phylum as that of a coral, that is Cnidaria. These sea anemones can be found in various locations across almost all the oceans of the world. So, it is an invertebrate animal that resembles a flower. The next statement says that association of clownfish with sea anemones is an example of amensalism. Let us have a brief recap of the population interaction. I am sure you must have already studied them in your basics. The various population interactions are namely mutualism, competition, commensalism, amensalism, parasitism, and predation. Let us see how species interact. In mutualism, both species benefit and it is a positive interaction, whereas in competition both species are at loss, which is a negative interaction. In commensalism, one species benefits positively and the other is unaffected, whereas in amensalism, one species is negatively affected while the other is unaffected. In parasitism and predation, one benefits while the other is at loss. So, the association of clownfish with sea anemone, let's see how it works. See, this is a clownfish, the orange creature in sea anemone. This story has also been documented in a movie, that is Finding Nemo, in which this Nemo is a clownfish. See, this sea anemone has these tentacles which can be seen in both the pictures. These tentacles are stinging. So, this clownfish takes refuge in sea anemones, thereby it is protected from the predators that may prey upon this fish. So, this clownfish derives protection from the predators by living inside the sea anemone, whereas the sea anemone is not seen to be deriving any benefit from its association with the clownfish. Hence, this interaction in which the clownfish is benefiting but the sea anemone is not affected is an example of commensalism and not amensalism. Hence, this statement is incorrect. The third statement says that just like corals, sea anemone also undergo bleaching. This is also correct because we saw that mass bleaching has occurred in some of the regions of Lakshadweep Islands, making the answer of this question to be B. See, this is a bleached sea anemone and these are healthy and colorful sea anemones. question number 80. United Nations is using the term triple planetary crisis in the context of three interconnected issues that humanity currently faces. Now we have to list which are the constituents of this triple planetary crisis. It includes pollution, climate change and biodiversity loss. See, humanity is facing these issues which is greatly impacting the humans as well as the biodiversity across the earth. Pollution in terms of air, water, soil or noise pollution is causing great discomfort and inconvenience to plant as well as animal life. Likewise, climate change through erratic weather patterns, rise in sea levels, melting of glaciers is also impacting the various communities. And also biodiversity loss by way of habitat destruction, extinction of species and change in range of species is impacting the ecosystems of the earth. So, all of these three have been identified to be the triple planetary crisis by the United Nations. Now, what is being done to counter it? See, we know that for biodiversity loss, we have a convention that focuses on reversing the loss of biodiversity. This goes by the name of United Nations Convention on Biodiversity, UNCBD. For climate change, we all know that we have United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and for pollution, United Nations Environment is taking steps to combat it. So the answer will be C, that is 1, 3 and 5. Coming to question number 81. With reference to sustainable practices recently in the news, consider the following statements. The first is, biofloc technology utilizes beneficial microbes to enhance crop yields and control soil-borne pests. This is incorrect because biofloc technology does not pertain to controlling soil-borne pests, but it is a technology that is used in aquaculture. In this, what happens is, there are certain beneficial microbes which are put in the ponds. These microbes have the effect of converting the fish waste into a protein-rich feed for the fishes. In this, these beneficial microbes compete with the pathogens for resources, thereby limiting the growth of those pathogens. And in this way, this biofloc technology is helpful in two ways. One is that it increases the water efficiency, and second, it decreases the additional feed that is required for the fishes. The Department of Fisheries of Government of India is giving various incentives to farmers to adopt this biofloc technology by means of subsidies and schemes, etc. So this statement which says that it is a method to control soil-borne pests is incorrect. The biofloc technology is actually a technology used in aquaculture and not crop production. Second, the Fukuoka technique is a natural farming method that minimizes tillage and use of external inputs. This statement is correct. This technique is devised by Mr. Fukuoka, and it refers to no tillage and no plowing and no use of pesticides and herbicides in the field, and it lets the natural regenerative property of the soil to make it resilient and increase crop growth as well as crop health. This Mr. Fukuoka is also attributed with popularizing the seed ball method of planting of seeds in difficult terrains. Question 82 says that consider the following statements. Statement 1, coastal wetlands are highly effective at long-term carbon storage. This is correct. Coastal wetlands include salt marshes, seagrasses, meadows, the plants and vegetation that is present near the coastal stretches such as estuaries, etc. So, these wetlands are highly effective at long-term storage, long-term carbon storage. How? Statement 2, the majority of soil in coastal wetlands is anaerobic due to consistent water saturation. This statement is also correct. See, in coastal wetlands, what happens is the soil is waterlogged, the soil remains waterlogged for most period of time. In waterlogged conditions, we know that there is less of oxygen, that is, there are anaerobic conditions. In anaerobic condition, what happens is the rate of decomposition becomes slower. So, if decomposition becomes slower, what happens is the carbon dioxide, it is not released into the atmosphere. It is, that means less amount of carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Thereby, the carbon gets trapped in these coastal ecosystems. Hence, they are highly effective at long-term storage. To recap this mechanism, what happens is in coastal wetlands, the soil remains waterlogged. Waterlogging prevents oxygen and it facilitates anaerobic conditions. In anaerobic condition, the rate of decomposition slows down and as a result, carbon dioxide is not getting released into the atmosphere, or the less of carbon dioxide is getting released into the atmosphere, and this eventually leads to trapping of the carbon in the wetlands in these areas. Additionally, we also know that coastal wetlands are the regions of highest productivity. One of the most productive regions of earth are coastal wetlands. In this way, they take up the carbon dioxide and store it as biomass through the process of photosynthesis, thereby resulting in long-term storage of carbon dioxide. Hence, this statement is correct. The next statement says that wetland soils lead to faster decomposition of organic matter compared to terrestrial ecosystems. As we have already studied that the rate of decomposition of wetland is slow due to anaerobic conditions, whereas in terrestrial ecosystem plenty of oxygen is there, which increases the rate of decomposition. This eventually leads to more release of carbon dioxide, and hence this statement becomes incorrect. The soils of terrestrial ecosystems release more carbon as compared to the soils of wetland ecosystem, and the soils of terrestrial ecosystem are subject to greater rates of decomposition as compared to that of wetland ecosystem. So, only one of the statement, that is statement 2 is correct, and that explains statement 1. So, the answer of this question will be C. Okay, so this was all from the environment section. I hope you find it useful. Thank you. All the best.